Hello, I'm Pete aka On a Retro Tip and welcome back to the cancelled game series. This time it's Sony's well-loved first foray into the home console market, the original PlayStation. I know I almost always say this at the start of these videos, but there were a lot of unreleased games on the PlayStation, at least twice as many as I'll be showing you. I've selected the 30 that I think are the most interesting and that have enough information and media to actually show you. A huge thank you to the official PlayStation Museum for sending me several of these clips. This episode wouldn't have been possible otherwise. So without further ado, let's take a look at the first 15 of 30 cancelled PlayStation games. Developed in the late 90s by Paradox Development, Thrill Kill was set to be the next Mortal Kombat. A 3D arena-based fighter, it plays a lot like Power Stone 2 on the Dreamcast, which it would have predated by 2 years, so up to 4 players can battle it out Royal Rumble style. It was initially slated for a late '98 release, but publisher Virgin was bought out by EA and they didn't want to release a game with so much gratuitous violence. Thrill Kill would have been the first game in history to be rated adults only for violence by the ESRB, as all previous adult-only games achieved that status via sexually explicit content. Not to say that Thrill Kill wasn't a bit kinky too, this game's like a gang fight in a gimp's basement. Some of the costumes would be right at home in any sadomasochist wardrobe. The brutality was certainly something for the time. Mortal Kombat style finishing moves saw people rip limb from limb, and the special moves were equally graphic, although they had hilarious names like Bitch Slap. Finishes could be performed once the character had filled up their kill meter by dealing enough damage, and these fatalities were called thrill kills, hence the name. The story is pretty grim as well, to be honest. The 10 characters are all murderers who have died and gone to hell, and they're fighting for a chance at reincarnation. The game was entirely finished before EA cancelled it, so it's become widely available online if you want to download and play it. The thing is, despite the hype surrounding the game both before and after its cancellation, it just isn't very good. Raw Pursuit was in development from Regal Productions, although I'm unsure of the timeline or expected release date, but it was started before the console's launch. It's a racer on water, featuring various water-based vehicles including speedboats, jet skis and those airboat things they use in the Everglades, which you may remember from Gentle Ben if you're my age or older. It seems to blend the Ridge Racer-esque visuals for which the PlayStation had become known with the gameplay concept of Chase HQ. You're a government agent in pursuit of various criminals that would typically make use of water-based transport like dealers and smugglers, etc. And just like Chase HQ, you take on enemies and obstacles until you catch up with said criminal and take him out. Raw Pursuit promised 16 vehicles and 10 different courses or rivers, and also had a stunt mode as well as the standard pursuit mode in which the aim is to perform tricks. I really like it as a concept, and for me it has a real James Bond feel to it. Unfortunately, when it came to Raw Pursuit, the developers had to live and let die as it was never released. Ghost Rider was a side-scrolling action game from Neversoft to be published by Crystal Dynamics. It used the Skeleton Warriors engine using 3D environments and sprites. Development didn't really start, as this footage is of a demo that Neversoft built in 1995 to showcase the engine's lighting and fire effects, the chain weapon mechanics, and as a means to prove that Neversoft's depiction of Ghost Rider would be faithful to its comic book inspiration. The gameplay is reminiscent of Castlevania, with Ghost Rider's chain lashing enemies much like Simon's whip. 15 levels were planned, both on foot and on a motorbike, and Ghost Rider would have an array of attacks beyond the chain weapon, including Hellfire and a deadly stare. There was some reorganisation at Crystal Dynamics, and despite efforts to revive interest in the game, they decided to scrap the idea as it wasn't fully 3D, which was the in thing at the time. I can see where they were coming from, as if they weren't going to go 3D then this game would have been better as a 2D action game, as side-scrollers just work better that way. Based on the science fiction film set in 3028, Titan AE was in development in 1999 by Blitz Games, founded by the Oliver twins, and heading to the PlayStation and PC. The story, as with the film, follows Project Titan, which is a plan to artificially create an Earth-like planet using the titular spaceship Titan, with the AE standing for After Earth. Although a portion of the game sees you controlling the character on foot in a third-person action format, the majority is a third-person 3D space shooter, similar in style to games like Star Wars Rogue Squadron. A one-level demo was leaked online, but this was subsequently cracked to reveal 4 more playable levels. Titan AE was shown at E3 in 2000 with the name Planet Ice, which was the film's original title. The poor performance of the film at the box office and perhaps a few other contributing factors led Blitz to cancel the game. Information on this one is pretty thin on the ground, but we do know that YoYo was a 3D platform game being developed by Sony exclusively for the PlayStation. It seems similar to the 3D platform games of the era on the PlayStation like Crash Bandicoot and Croc. The main character is a monkey, presumably called YoYo, and levels have an Arabian theme complete with flying carpets. The colour palette and gameplay actually remind me of Aladdin on the Mega Drive and Super Nintendo, and not just because they both have an Arabian influence. Not sure why this one was cancelled, but it's a shame as it looks like it could have been great. First announced in early '96 and shown at E3 the same year, Aeon Flux was a game adaptation of the animated series being developed by Cryo Interactive with Viacom Publishing. Not to be confused with the PS2 Xbox game of the same name, Aeon Flux on the PlayStation was to be based loosely on one particular episode and would feature several characters from the series. You would play as leather-clad secret agent Aeon Flux, and gameplay would blend third-person shooting with hand-to-hand combat and puzzle sections. The series creator got involved with the game's development and directed the motion capture shoot and was reportedly very impressed with how faithful it was to his original work. Halfway through the game's development, Viacom merged with Virgin Interactive, and during the process all of Viacom's active projects were cancelled. This resulted in Cryo Interactive losing the rights to Aeon Flux, so it was repurposed into Pax Corpus, which came to the PlayStation and PC in '97. Now, I'm not a huge fan of motorbike racing games, but what a shame Test Drive Cycles was never released. This game was built specially to utilise the PlayStation's 3D capabilities, complete with its own custom-built engine. Being developed in '98 and '99 by Accolade's San Jose Studios, Test Drive Cycles was to be the Gran Turismo of motorcycle games. They'd previously worked on the Test Drive Off-Road sequels, and Infogrames wanted to expand the series to include motorbikes. The game would have 11 tracks, which could be played single player or split screen, and feature over 35 real-world motorcycles to race from well-known manufacturers including Harley-Davidson and BMW. Rather than riding on race tracks as you do in games like MotoGP, the courses in Test Drive Cycles were somewhat more scenic, complete with traffic, shortcuts and jumps. The player would be able to use the money earned in the races to buy new bikes and upgrade their existing ones. It seems that the game faced a major setback when the project lead left the studio, and Infogrames had already expressed a desire to close the studio down, so Test Drive Cycles was cancelled. As I said, these games aren't really my thing, but I can still mourn this as a loss for the PlayStation, as it looks absolutely fantastic. This is an odd one as it's a bit of a mystery. Maniac Moons was allegedly obtained via an auction when Acclaim went bankrupt. It seems to be a futuristic 3D shooter and features 20 levels and a 2-player battle mode. There are 2 ships from which to choose, each having various weapons including a bomb. The action takes place on various moons, and you blast your way through land and air vehicles. Interestingly, many of the enemy vehicles are from the present day, such as helicopters and tanks, in contrast to the advanced ship that you're piloting. Given its source, it's assumed that Acclaim would have been the publisher, but as yet this is unconfirmed and nobody has any idea who developed it. Bounty Arms was being developed by Data West, with a planned release date in early '95. It resembles 2D vertically scrolling action shooters like Commando and Ikari Warriors, and shares their arcade feel with its power-ups and fast gameplay. The graphics are really nice, but probably not what Western PlayStation owners were used to at the time, so perhaps its lack of 3D was one of the reasons behind its cancellation. The player, or players in co-op mode, control one of two female characters, Chris and Ray. They each have an extending robotic arm called a relic arm, which acts as a weapon and can be used to attack enemies, defend against incoming fire, and pull the character across gaps. A playable beta demo of Bounty Arms was discovered on a demo disc used in Japanese PlayStation kiosks back in the 90s and was released online. It gives a nice taste of the game despite only featuring half a level, and for some reason has invincible playable characters. Considering attitudes towards 2D games at the time versus opinions now, in hindsight this is one that may have done well in Japan only, but one that I'd put money on being collectible nowadays among Westerners had it been released. I read a synopsis of Gen 13's plot and it made no bloody sense to me, but hey, who cares, so I'm just going to gloss over that. It's based on the comic book series of the same name, starring a team of superpowered teenagers. The PlayStation game was being developed by Grey Matter and would be published by EA. It was an interesting mix of genres, including side-scrolling shooter/beat-em-up levels, as well as an arena mode which was a versus fighter. Gen 13 could be played 1 or 2 player, controlling any of the 5 playable characters, and featured quote team-up levels in which the computer AI controls any other non-player allied characters. As I said, this is a bit of a mixed bag, and seemingly the engine was designed to allow for a wide range of camera angles, sequences and gameplay styles. Sadly, due to some kind of disagreement between Grey Matter and EA, the studio closed and all games in development were cancelled, including Gen 13. Parasite was a side-scrolling action-adventure game from Virtual Studio. It was obviously never released for the PlayStation, but was released on DOS with the title R-Crits the Intruder. I can't find any footage of the PlayStation version, so what you're seeing here is footage of the DOS game. It was billed as a film noir thriller and had quite a bizarre premise. You play as an average Joe, but he's been possessed by a member of some kind of alien law enforcement. You explore the city, which consists of over 300 3D screens, in search of undercover aliens. Looking at the gameplay, it doesn't look like you have to look very hard, as every human enemy you encounter seems to be an alien, morphing back into their xenomorph-like original form as they die. Time is of the essence, as the aliens' body-snatching antics will mutate your body irreparably if left untreated. I'm not sure why this was cancelled for the PlayStation, but let's face it, it's a bit weird, and controls and animations seem a bit jerky. Starcon, aka Star Control 4, was a planned Star Control spin-off from ScHlAuChi, with Starsphere Interactive handling the PlayStation version. It was shown in some form at 98C3. A space shooter a bit similar to the excellent X-Wing series on DOS, Starcon saw you pilot one of several selectable ships in outer space, engaging in non-linear missions and space combat. The ships available varied depending on which race you chose to play as, and each could carry one primary and one secondary weapon at a time. These weapons included numerous different missiles, lasers, cannons, turrets and homing bolts. There were also ship upgrades available, such as repair droids, armour and auxiliary engines. It was originally said to be another space adventure like the previous Star Control games, but during development it shifted to a more action-based shooter, so it has a more arcadey feel to it. It's a pity this never made it, as I think it could have been a real success on the PlayStation, and it's something that I definitely would have been interested in at the time. Adding in the fact that Starcon also had a 2-player versus mode called Hyper Melee and co-op only makes it seem more desirable. ScHlAuChi only really announced that Starcon was delayed as they were adjusting its gameplay style, so it was cancelled without much fanfare. A beta prototype was released online in 2010. Werewolf the Apocalypse would have been a video game adaptation of White Wolf's role-playing game of the same name, and was being developed by Capcom in the mid-90s for the PlayStation and Saturn. I can only find footage of an early Saturn prototype. It's a third-person 3D action-adventure game with 7 playable characters, all of whom are controlled in either human wolf or werewolf form. I'm not sure about the fine details of the story or gameplay, but if this prototype is anything to go by, it's probably not a huge loss this was cancelled, as it looks a bit naff. Big Guns was a mech shooter being developed by Neversoft in 96-97. Quite an interesting story with this one considering its ups and downs. Initially, Neversoft created a demo of Big Guns so they could show off the engine to Shiny Entertainment as a bid to develop the PlayStation port of MDK. It worked, and they were hired to handle the port, so Neversoft cracked on with MDK using the Big Guns engine, and Big Guns was bought by Sony. Sony made some mad changes to the concept, so it was renamed Exodus and bizarrely changed from a mech shooter to an action game featuring a quote, cat girl. This idea was obviously never going to work, so the project was scrapped entirely in late 97. After some downsizing, Neversoft were pretty skint after all this, and they'd suffered because the MDK port took longer than anticipated. Fortunately for them and us, Activision hired them to develop the PlayStation exclusive Apocalypse, which pulled them back from the brink of closing. Apocalypse also used the Big Guns engine. I say fortunate for us because the following year they released the first Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which was awesome. Anyway, the game. Big Guns was, as I said, a 3D mech shooter. It featured a co-op mode in which the two mechs could combine to form one large mech, kind of like Power Rangers. Dead Unity was a planned survival horror game developed by Aramat Productions and to be published by THQ. From what we can see from the footage, Dead Unity distanced itself from the traditional zombies and/or demonic creatures format of horror games from the era and went for a futuristic sci-fi vibe featuring advanced technology and robots. It seems to blend Resident Evil's gameplay style and a science fiction storyline, which could have been a really interesting idea. Sadly, it was cancelled for some reason, so maybe we'll never know. So that was the first half of 30 cancelled PlayStation games we'll be looking at. Keep an eye out for part 2 where we'll see another 15, and let me know in the comments if any of these games stood out to you. And as always, thanks for watching.